You're just the help. Sign the lease over, my daughter-in-law said across the dinner table, tapping the paper with her manicured nail. I nodded once, slow and polite, like I'd heard her. I reached for my water glass and took a calm sip, keeping my face soft. Then, the bank called. My phone buzzed against my thigh, and I didn't even flinch. I excused myself with the smallest smile, walked to the hallway like I was heading to the restroom, and answered in a whisper. Tell me exactly what was changed. Tell me where you're listening from. The dining room smelled like roast chicken and lemon, the kind of dinner that's supposed to feel safe. My son's jaw was tight. My husband, Gary, sat to my right like he belonged there. Shoulders relaxed, napkin folded just so. On the table, right in front of me, was a thick lease packet in a clean plastic sleeve. Yellow, sign here, tabs marched down the side like little flags. At the top, in bold, it said, assignment of lease, landlord transfer, and below it was my duplex address, the one I've owned for 22 years. You're confused. You need help, my daughter-in-law added, voice syrupy now, as if she was correcting a child. Her mother laughed too loudly, and her sister smirked into her wine glass. It was a full chorus, and everyone knew their part. I kept my hands still. I didn't defend myself at the table. I just slid the lease packet closer, as if I might actually read it, and quietly turned my car keys in my palm under the napkin. But that wasn't the worst part. When my phone lit up, the caller ID didn't show a person. It showed my bank's fraud department number, and the voice on the other end didn't sound curious at all. Mrs. Halstead? The woman asked. This is verification. We received a request to add a new authorized agent to your accounts and to submit documents for power of attorney review. Did you initiate that today? The hallway felt suddenly too bright. My mouth stayed steady, but my stomach dropped like an elevator, because I hadn't filed anything and I hadn't authorized anyone, especially not today. I glanced down at the lease packet in my hands. On the cover page in the upper right corner was a contact email typed neatly, Gary Andrandiau. Randy was my husband's old friend. The one he kept insisting was good with paperwork. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't march back to the table. I simply answered the bank. No, I did not. The woman's tone tightened into procedure. Then I'm placing a temporary hold on outbound transfers while we review. You'll need to come in with ID. And ma'am, do you feel safe? I looked toward the dining room doorway. I could hear forks clinking like nothing had changed. My husband's laugh rose above the others, warm and practiced. I said, I'm safe enough to leave. And I hung up with my hands still steady. Back at the table, my daughter-in-law pushed a pen toward me like she was doing me a favor. Gary's knee brushed mine under the table. Soft pressure, the kind that says, do what we planned. And my son wouldn't look up at all. I stood slowly, smoothed my blouse, and said, I'll be right back. Then I picked up my purse, walked out as if I'd forgotten something in my car, and didn't return. In the rearview mirror, I saw the porch lights shrink behind me, and I realized they weren't trying to convince me. They were trying to process me. What had they already submitted to my bank in my name? I drove straight home, not fast, not panicked, just intentional. My hands stayed at 10 and 2, and my breathing stayed even because I knew something now that I didn't know at dinner. They had started moving paperwork without me. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light was on, bright, welcoming, wrong. Gary's car was already there, even though he'd arrived at dinner with me. That fresh pressure pressed right into my ribs. He had left early, or he hadn't come with me at all. I stepped inside and stopped cold. A black suitcase sat upright by the front door, zipped, tagged, handle extended like a traveler waiting for an airport curb. A printed itinerary was clipped to the top with a little binder clip, crisp and ready. Paris, the header read, like I was supposed to be excited. But that wasn't the worst part. On the kitchen counter, next to my fruit bowl, was Gary's bottle of brain health vitamins. He'd been pushing them on me for months. Just one in the morning, he'd say, like he was the caring husband, like I was the one slipping. Tonight the cap was off, and the pills were arranged in a neat little line on a napkin, white ovals, too perfect. I didn't touch them with my bare hands. I grabbed a zip-top bag from the drawer, tipped the napkin carefully, and sealed 3 pills inside. Then I wrote the date and time with a marker and set the bag in my freezer, right beside the peas. Because if someone is trying to build a story about your mind, you start building proof about their behavior. That's when I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, and my skin went tight. I turned off the kitchen light and stood behind the curtain, watching the driveway through the gap. Gary walked up with his phone to his ear, speaking softly, like he didn't want the neighbors to hear. A new discovery snapped into place. He wasn't improvising. He was coordinating. And the way he held himself, shoulders loose, confident, told me he believed I was already handled. I backed away from the window and moved through my house the way I used to move when my babies were sleeping. Quiet, controlled, careful. In the guest room closet, I pulled down my old digital recorder, the one I used years ago for community meetings when people forgot what they promised. I checked the batteries, pressed record, and slipped it into my robe pocket. Then I remembered my gardener, Marcus. He'd been with me for 8 years, licensed, bonded, and the kind of man who notices what people pretend not to see. Earlier that afternoon before the dinner, he'd caught my wrist at the gate, gentle but urgent, and said, "Ma'am, don't sign anything tonight." At the time, I'd laughed it off. Now my throat went dry, because Marcus didn't gossip. If he said it, he'd seen something. My phone buzzed. A text from Gary. "Honey, surprise trip. Pack light. Trust me." And right behind it, another text. "If you get overwhelmed, Randy can help explain." Randy again. That name sat in my chest like a stone. I walked to my desk, opened my drawer, and pulled out my life insurance policy folder. The one I keep because I'm not naive about paperwork. The beneficiary page was still mine to change. Still my choice. Still my control. I took photos of the page with my phone and emailed them to myself with one subject line. Baseline. If they tried to change it, I wanted proof of what it said before. Then I started a simple timeline in a notebook. Dinner time, quote said, lease packet shown, bank call received, suitcase found, vitamins collected. But that wasn't the worst part. In the trash can, under coffee grounds, I found a torn sheet of paper with a partial heading. Intake DART assessment. The ink was smudged, but I could still read 2 words that didn't belong in my home. Private facility. My heart didn't race. It hardened. Because I'd seen enough in life to know what people do when they want your assets without your consent. My phone rang again. My bank this time. A different representative asked me to confirm my address and said, "We're also seeing a request to redirect statements to a new mailing address. Is that authorized?" I looked at the black suitcase by my door, the itinerary to Paris, the vitamins lined like a ritual, and the torn intake sheet in my hand. And I realized the Paris trip wasn't a gift. It was an exit strategy. For them, not for me. So I told the bank, "No, freeze it, flag everything." And I whispered to myself as I hung up, "Not tonight." When I heard Gary's key in the lock, I stepped into the hallway with a calm face, the recorder running quietly in my pocket. He smiled at me like nothing was wrong and said, "There you are, ready for our trip?" And I smiled back, just enough, as if I believed him. What did he think that suitcase was really for? In the morning, I played the part they expected. I moved slowly. I asked gentle questions. I let Gary think his plan was working because a person who feels secure gets sloppy. He poured coffee and slid a pill toward me with 2 fingers, like it was normal, like it was love. "Brain health," he said again, cheerful. "You've been so scattered lately." I didn't swallow it. I pretended to. I lifted my mug at the same moment, covered the motion, and let the pill drop into my sleeve where I'd tucked a tissue. Then I pocketed it later, sealed it in another bag, and wrote the time. But that wasn't the worst part. Around noon, Marcus's truck pulled up, unexpected. He didn't come to the front door. He came around the side where my guest house sits, half hidden by hedges. I met him there, and he didn't waste a word. "A black van came last week," he said, voice low. "No logo. 2 men. Your husband let them in. They walked around the house like they were measuring." He looked straight at me. "And ma'am, they installed something. I saw a wire. I didn't like it." My skin went cold, but my mind went clear. Hidden cameras, private facility operators, a network, not a misunderstanding. I asked Marcus one question. "Did anyone see?" He nodded toward the neighboring fence line. "Ms. Alvarez across the way," he said. "She saw the van too." I didn't run. I didn't confront Gary. I quietly packed a small bag and moved into the guest house with my phone, my recorder, my lease packet copies, and my policy folder. From there, I could watch the main house without being trapped inside it. That afternoon, the black van returned. It rolled up slow, tires crunching gravel, and stopped at my front steps like it belonged there. Two men stepped out wearing plain jackets and polite expressions. One carried a clipboard. The other carried a small case that looked like equipment. Gary greeted them with the easy confidence of a man expecting service. Randy stepped out of his car right after, smiling wide, waving like this was a backyard barbecue. I lifted my phone and recorded from behind the guest house curtain, hands steady. They went inside my home, and through the window, I watched them spread papers across my dining table. The same table where I've hosted birthdays, served soup when my kids were sick, signed Christmas cards with aching hands. Now it held forms, not family. A new discovery hit me like a slap. One of the forms had my name pre-printed with a checkbox beside it. Voluntary admission, voluntary, like I'd ever choose a place I didn't even know existed. I zoomed in until my phone camera caught the header of the page. It listed a specialist physician, private, concierge, and a facility address that wasn't a hospital at all. It was a private behavioral center, expensive, discreet, and perfect for making someone disappear behind care. On the corner of the table sat my life insurance policy folder. My folder, the one I never leave out. Gary had found it. Pressure surged so hard I had to press my palm to the wall to stay grounded. Because this wasn't just about control, it was about access. If they could label me incapable, they could take everything with a signature that wasn't mine. My phone buzzed again. A calendar notification that I didn't create. Assessment, 9 a.m., Dr. Klein. It had been added to my digital calendar, meaning someone had access to my accounts. I didn't scream. I didn't rush the house. I did the only thing that holds up in court and in banks. I documented. I started building my dossier timeline in a simple folder on my laptop. Screenshots of the calendar entry, video of the van, photos of the suitcase and itinerary, notes on the vitamin routine, and the lease packet with the Gary and Randy email printed on it. Type respect if you've lived this. Near dusk, Gary called out for me like he couldn't see the trap he'd built. "Honey," he shouted, "we have an appointment tomorrow. The specialist is going to help us." Help us. That phrase sounded like a cage dressed as concern. I waited until he went inside. Then I called my bank again, asked for the fraud department, and told them, "Someone is attempting to establish power of attorney without my consent. I have documentation. I need an in-person appointment first thing." The representative paused, then said something that changed the shape of the next day. "Ma'am," she said, "if this is possible exploitation, we can escalate to our financial abuse team. We may also be required to report." Report. That word mattered. Because reports create intervention, and intervention creates witnesses. I looked at the black suitcase still sitting by my front door like a threat, and I realized tomorrow's appointment wasn't just a meeting. It was their deadline. Would I walk into that specialist office alone, or would I arrive with a file they couldn't talk their way out of? At 8:15 the next morning, I walked into my bank wearing my beige coat and my most composed face, like I was there to open a CD, not to save my life. I carried a folder under my arm, my dossier timeline, thick with printouts, photos, and timestamps. And in my pocket, my digital recorder sat warm, ready. The branch manager, a woman named Denise, met me in a small glass office. She had calm eyes, a neat blazer, and the kind of voice that doesn't take sides, only facts. She asked for my ID, then she asked me to tell her, slowly, what I believed was happening. So I did. I didn't rant. I didn't speculate. I gave her a timeline. Dinner quote, lease packet, bank verification call, attempted POA submission, attempted statement redirect, calendar entry for assessment, black van, vitamins, private facility paperwork. Denise's face didn't change much, but I noticed one thing. Her hand moved to her keyboard with purpose. New pressure arrived in that moment, because if I couldn't prove it, the system could treat it like family drama, and family drama doesn't get protected. That's when I slid the lease packet cover sheet across the desk. I pointed to the email address in the corner, Gary Andrandi. Then I showed her the screenshot of my bank call log and the fraud department note that confirmed I denied authorization. Seed number 1 paid off right there, under fluorescent lights, in a room built for truth. Denise nodded once. "Thank you," she said. And the words weren't sympathy. They were acknowledgement. She printed a report summary and circled 2 lines with a pen. POA documents received via email portal. Request to add agent pending verification. Ma'am, she said, we're placing a protective hold on major movements. No new agents, no address changes, no beneficiary updates through us without your in-person verification. Then she leaned forward slightly. And we are escalating to our elder financial protection team. That may include a report to the appropriate agencies. But that wasn't the worst part. Denise pulled up the email submission record and turned the screen toward me. The sender name wasn't just Gary, it was Randy too, listed as a preparer. And attached was a scanned letter on doctor letterhead stating, "Cognitive concerns noted." My breath stayed even, but my fingers went cold, because the specialist wasn't an idea. He was already part of the paper trail. I said, "I have supplements I believe were used to impair me." Denise didn't flinch. She said, "Do you have lab confirmation?" Not yet, but I had sealed samples and a plan. I left the bank with printed documentation, a case number, and Denise's direct line written on a sticky note she pressed into my folder like a lifeline. Outside, I sat in my car for one long breath and realized the bank had done something my family wouldn't. They listened, they recorded, they acted. Next, I drove straight to an urgent care lab affiliated with my primary physician's practice. The one doctor I've seen for years, the one who knows my baseline. I didn't tell them a dramatic story. I said, "I need these supplements tested. I need documentation." They gave me chain of custody forms. They labeled my sealed bags. They printed receipts. And I kept every paper like it was gold, because in a situation like mine, paper is power. By late afternoon, Gary called me 12 times. My son called 5. My daughter-in-law texted once, "You're confused, stop causing problems." I didn't reply. I forwarded every message to myself and added them to the dossier. Then, I did the most important thing I'd done all week. I called my attorney, my real attorney, not Gary's paperwork friend. And I told her, I need immediate protection. I need to revoke any attempted POA, and I need guidance on involuntary commitment threats. She didn't gasp. She didn't soothe me with platitudes. She said, "Bring your documents. We'll file a notice of no consent and prepare a response if a petition is attempted." A new discovery settled into place as she spoke. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a coordinated attempt to separate me from my rights using medical language as a weapon. That night, I set my kitchen table like a courtroom. Folder, printed bank summary, lab chain of custody receipt, lease packet with the yellow tabs, and my recorder placed in plain view, because tomorrow, if they tried to corner me, I wanted them to see I wasn't alone anymore. The specialist appointment was still on the calendar for 9 a.m. And I knew they expected me to show up docile, apologetic, ready to sign. So I decided something quietly, the way I decide everything now. I would go, but I would not go unarmed. What would happen when their specialist met my file before he met my face? The waiting room smelled like peppermint and money. Soft chairs, muted art, a receptionist who smiled too long, like she'd been trained to calm people who didn't want to be there. Gary sat beside me with his hand on my forearm, gentle pressure that looked loving from a distance and controlling up close. Randy sat on the other side, legs crossed, tapping his phone like he was waiting for a delivery. My son wasn't there, but my daughter-in-law had texted, "Don't fight it, sign and rest." I nodded at the receptionist when she called my name. I stood. I walked back without rushing, and in my pocket, my recorder ran. The specialist, Dr. Klein, was polished, clean desk, warm tone. He spoke in the language of concern, the kind that can turn a capable woman into a case if nobody challenges it. He asked me simple questions first, and I answered them calmly, clearly, correctly. Date, address, names of my children, medication list. I watched him note things anyway, his pen moving like he'd already decided. But that wasn't the worst part. Gary leaned forward and said, "She's been confused. She forgets. She gets upset." Then Randy added, too casual, "And she makes bad financial choices. We're trying to protect her." Dr. Klein nodded like a man receiving a script he'd seen before. He slid a document across the desk toward me. A pen followed it like a final step. "Just a standard consent," he said, smiling. "It allows your husband to assist with decisions temporarily. It's for your peace of mind." Peace of mind. That phrase sounded like dinner all over again. You're just the help dressed up in medical ink. I looked down at the form. It wasn't just consent. It referenced temporary guardianship support and facility coordination. It was a bridge document. Sign this, and the next door opens. My attorney's words echoed, do not sign anything under pressure. Denise's bank case number sat in my folder like a shield, and the chain of custody receipt from the lab was folded neatly in my purse. So I did what I'd done at dinner. I nodded. I smiled slightly, and I said, can I have a copy for my records? Dr. Klein's eyes flickered, just once, because people who count on compliance don't love paperwork requests. Still, he motioned to the receptionist to print it. While they stepped out, Gary leaned in and whispered, stop making this hard. And my recorder caught every syllable. That was the moment I set the trap gently on the table. I opened my folder and placed 3 documents in a neat line: the bank's fraud summary, the protective hold notice, and the lab chain of custody receipt with my signature and the date. Dr. Klein returned and paused when he saw them. What's this? He asked, voice tighter now. I kept my tone steady. My bank contacted me, I said. They received power of attorney documents I did not authorize. I denied them. There is an active hold. Then I looked directly at him. And I have sealed supplement samples currently being tested because I believe I was being drugged without my consent. The room went quiet in a way that felt like oxygen changing. Randy laughed too quickly. Gary's face stiffened. Dr. Klein's pen stopped moving. I slid one more thing onto the desk, a printed screenshot of the email submission record Denise had shown me, including the preparer name. Randy's. Can you explain? I asked softly. Why my bank records list your friend as a preparer for documents that claim I'm impaired? Gary's hand tightened on my arm. Not enough to bruise, enough to show the truth, but that wasn't the worst part. Dr. Klein cleared his throat and said, we can discuss that later. Then he tried to steer it back. Right now, we're focusing on your care. Care. I looked at him and said the one sentence that turned the whole room into a place of accountability. I am requesting that any evaluation be paused until my attorney is present. He blinked. Gary snapped, she doesn't need an attorney. And my recorder caught that too. I stood up slowly and stepped back, creating space. Then I pulled out my phone and called Denise's direct line, the bank manager, right there, in front of them. Denise answered, crisp. I said, I'm in a medical office where documents are being pushed on me. I believe this is connected to the POA submission. I need your financial exploitation team to proceed. Denise didn't hesitate. Understood, she said. We're escalating immediately and filing the appropriate report. Gary's face drained. Randy's smile vanished. Dr. Klein's posture changed from confident to cautious, like he'd suddenly remembered that his license depends on process. A knock sounded on the door. The receptionist's voice came through thin. Doctor, there are 2 officers here asking about a report. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, calm, with my folder in my hands. And Dr. Klein looked at Gary like he'd just realized he wasn't being paid enough for this version of the story. When the door opened and the officers stepped inside, Gary's fingers finally slipped from my arm. What would my husband say when someone in uniform asked out loud, who authorized all this? The officers didn't burst in like television. They walked in like real life, calm, direct, and focused on facts. One asked my name, the other asked if I felt safe. I answered both clearly. Then I opened my folder and placed it on the desk the way my mother taught me to set down a cake. Steady, careful, with intention. Dr. Klein tried to speak first. He started with concerns and support and temporary measures. But when the officer asked, do you have her written consent? His words thinned fast. Gary attempted a laugh. Randy said, this is a misunderstanding. And the officer looked at me and said, ma'am, do you consent? No, I said. One word. A full stop. But that wasn't the best part. The best part was watching procedure do what emotion never could. The officers asked for names, took notes, and requested the documents that had been presented to me. Dr. Klein's receptionist printed copies, hands trembling just enough to show she knew this wasn't routine anymore. Denise called me back while I was still in the office. She told me the bank's financial exploitation team had filed the report and that an adult protective services social worker had been notified as part of standard protocol. Not because I begged, because the paper trail forced it. When the social worker arrived later that day, credentialed, calm, and firm, she didn't ask me how I felt first. She asked what I could prove, and I handed her my timeline like a map. The lab results came in within 48 hours. They didn't come with drama. They came with black and white language, stamped and signed, confirming the supplements contained an unlisted sedating agent not disclosed on the bottle. My hands stayed steady when I read it, but my chest went tight with a quiet kind of grief. Because the betrayal wasn't a guess anymore. It was documented. That documentation changed everything. The social worker coordinated with law enforcement to open a case for exploitation and unlawful coercion. My attorney filed an emergency notice of no consent, and we put formal language on record that I rejected any power of attorney changes, any guardianship petitions, and any voluntary admission papers tied to coercion. The bank's hold stayed in place until I personally confirmed new security steps in branch. We changed passwords, added verbal passphrases, and removed any portal access that wasn't mine. Denise also helped me set alerts for every attempted change, mailing address, authorized agents, large transfers, so I'd never again learn about a threat after it landed. Then I did what I should have done the day Gary first called Randy helpful. I changed my locks, every door, every gate. I installed new cameras with professional monitoring, and I posted signs that made it clear, this property records video. When Gary came home that night, his key didn't work. He stood on the porch and knocked like a stranger. I opened the door with the chain on, calm and not afraid, and I handed him one envelope. Inside was a legal notice from my attorney. He was not to enter my property, not to contact my bank, and not to present any medical paperwork in my name. It also outlined the consequences if he tried again. He started to plead. He tried to make it about love. He tried to make it about my confusion. And for the first time, I saw him the way I should have seen him for months, like a man who thought my life was an asset list. My son came 2 days later, alone, face gray with shame. He said, "Evelyn told me you'd be okay," and I realized something clean and sad. He had outsourced his conscience to his wife. I didn't scream at him. I didn't beg him to choose me. I told him the truth, simple and firm. "You will not speak for me," I said. "You will not present papers for me. And you will not bring anyone into my life who calls me the help and expects me to sign my rights away at dinner." Then I did the last piece of the title's promise, the one that mattered most. I walked into my duplex office the next morning with my deed folder, my lease packet copies, and my attorney's letterhead. We served formal notice that no lease assignment would occur, that any coercive documents were invalid, and that any further pressure would be handled through counsel. I didn't need revenge. I needed boundaries that held up under fluorescent lights and official stamps. If you're listening and you've ever been treated like you're disposable in your own life, remember this. Calm is not weakness when it's backed by paperwork. And if you want, stay with me, because respect isn't something I ask for anymore. It's the rule that locks my door.